I'm Chad Huntley, NBC News. The 20th session of the Paris talks on Vietnam got nowhere today, but the 4.5-hour meeting was interesting. The Viet Cong announced that it's opening consultations with what it called other goodwill groups in South Vietnam and in Paris for the purpose of providing a provisional government. Apparently, the Viet Cong intend to bypass the present Saigon regime. American spokesman Harold Kaplan, asked about the position of the United States on that matter, said it is not for us to rule anything in or out. Otherwise, today's session featured a long and bitter tirade against the Nixon administration and against the plan to have the South Vietnamese take over more of the military burden. In Saigon today, a group of intellectuals proposed an interim government to run the country prior to new elections. In Washington, Secretary of State Rogers held a news conference. He refused to say when the first American troops will leave South Vietnam, but he did comment on the ability of the South Vietnamese to replace Americans.
I think they are willing to take over more of the responsibility. I think that the training of the ARVN has been moving along at a rapid pace. They recognize that the United States commitment is not open-ended, and they are not being pushed in this position. They came to this conclusion on their own, and I think are perfectly ready to move in this direction. Now, on the other hand, President Nixon has stated, and President Thieu has stated, that as a result of an election, if the people want to vote for the communists or any other system of government, and their vote is freely cast and counted, then all parties will abide by their choice. Now, if that is what you mean by a government that represents both the leaders now in South Vietnam and some communists, obviously that would be acceptable to us. And obviously that would be acceptable to the South Vietnamese. We're not wedded to any government in Saigon. The President made that clear in his speech on May 14th. The only principle to which the administration is wedded is that the people of South Vietnam should have the right by free choice to decide their future, so that any government which represents the will of the people in South Vietnam is acceptable to the United States.
The enemy appears to have opened a terrorist campaign to coincide with the trip by South Vietnam's President Thieu to Midway to meet President Nixon. 6 terrorist incidents today in Saigon killed 3 and wounded 7. Later, a tremendous explosion occurred at Saigon's Tan Son Nhut Air Base. A North Vietnamese anti-aircraft crew shot down an unarmed American reconnaissance airplane. The 2 crewmen were rescued out of the Gulf of Tonkin, and then 2 American fighter bombers, in retaliation, attacked the gun emplacement. Last week's casualties, 261 Americans killed, 1,810 wounded. South Vietnam lost 325 killed. Enemy dead were said to be more than 2,600. A total of 265,174 Americans have been killed or wounded now in Vietnam, a figure which surpasses the casualties of World War I, although there are about 17,000 fewer fatalities. In California, President Nixon spent the day at work, traveling 25 miles up the coast from San Clemente by helicopter to an office set up for him. Uppermost in his mind, of course, is the Sunday meeting on Midway with South Vietnamese President Thieu. A report from NBC News White House correspondent Herbert Kaplow.
The President is spending much of his time here preparing for the Midway meeting, but all that is being said officially here about troop withdrawals being announced on Midway is that is speculation. Still, that's far short of a denial. Secretary Rogers' comments today were only the latest in a series of administration remarks pointing toward the replacement of some American troops by South Vietnamese soldiers. The President himself set up a criterion that this could happen only when South Vietnamese units are well enough trained to replace Americans, and he said a few weeks ago that this training is going along excellently. Rogers reinforced this today. There are events that could delay an announcement at Midway, a sudden step-up, for instance, in enemy military activity. Perhaps some details have yet to be worked out with South Vietnamese President Thieu. Just how the enemy might react is also, of course, being discussed. But the president is definitely moving toward the decision, if not at Midway, then probably not too long afterward. For one thing, the replacement of some American by South Vietnamese troops could blunt further anti-war criticism here at home. Herbert Kaplow, NBC News, with the president at Newport Beach, California.
The Huntley Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News and brought to you in color by Sherwin-Williams Paints. The paints people trust, from the people who cover the earth.
You're looking at one of the world's great cover-ups. It's a brilliant white house coat from Sherwin-Williams, called Chem One Coat, because one coat is all you ever need to cover. And we don't just promise one coat coverage, we put it in writing. Chem One Coat, premium house paint from Sherwin-Williams, the paints people trust.
Secretary of State Rogers said today that the Midway meeting will slightly delay the arms limitation talks with Russia, but they should begin early in the summer. And he said while the United States is talking, it's going to go right on testing new weapons. Senator Scott, the Republican whip, held a news conference to say that a poll made for a group favoring the Safeguard ABM shows 84% of the people want some such system, and he predicted it would be approved by the Senate. President Nixon's speech yesterday, in which he attacked neo-isolationists and unilateral disarmers, did not go unnoticed by Scott. He said there's no room in Congress for them, and anyway, he doubted any were there. That's not the way Senator Proxmire interpreted the speech. The Wisconsin Democrat is chairman of a joint congressional committee on the military budget. And at today's hearing, he got into an exchange with Representative Barbara Conable, a New York Republican.
Because of the unfortunately strong language in the beginning of the president's speech, it has been interpreted as an attack on the patriotism of those who are questioning the basic need of this nation for a military force as large and as burdensome as it now is. This language in the speech seems designed to intimidate those who question whether America's role in the world can be best served by a large and expanding military force instead of a more vigorous dedication of our resources to our pressing, serious domestic needs.
Mr. Chairman, may I say something?
Yes, indeed, Mr. Conable.
I was not aware that the meeting was to be opened with such a statement. It seems to me that the President left ample room in his remarks for the function of this committee and for the constructive work I think we're doing in the area of priorities. I don't believe he intended or in fact did impugn the patriotism of anybody questioning defense expenditures.
There's a feeling, at least, that when President Nixon spoke out as he did yesterday, there's a tendency once again to resurrect all the political fear that has stifled this kind of dissent and criticism that we've had so usefully in the last few months. So that this is something new, and for that reason I think it's very important that we recognize that it shouldn't be stifled. There shouldn't be any effort, certainly on the part of a man as powerful and important as the President of the United States, to make statements that would discourage criticism.
Senator Fulbright said today that the United States has settled its dispute with the Spanish government over military bases in Spain. The agreement involves a 2-year lease extension in return for an undisclosed payment. Fulbright said he considered the settlement a step toward liquidation of the bases. At Fort Ord, California, an Army court-martial is expected to start deliberations today in the trial of 14 soldiers charged with mutiny. A report from NBC News correspondent Don Oliver.
14 soldiers, not one of them more than 21 years old, and all of them accused of mutiny. Last October, they were among 27 prisoners who staged a sit-down, song-singing protest against conditions in an Army stockade at the Presidio. Their court-martial has been in session for 36 days, the longest in the Army's history. Counsel for the Army contends their act of protest was premeditated to destroy authority in the stockade. Civilian attorney Terrence Hallinan put 14 psychiatrists on the stand to testify the soldiers were temporarily insane and didn't know what they were doing. In the courtroom today, Hallinan, in his final defense summation, said his clients were hysterical children, driven by stockade conditions and their own psychotic problems. They were, he said, under an insane delusion that their protest was the proper way to exercise their rights and restore military procedure. The prosecution summed up last, contending that conditions in the stockade were not so bad as to force the soldiers to disobey. Chief Prosecutor Captain Dean Flippo said the defense had failed to provide evidence of cruel treatment or unsanitary conditions in the stockade. He told the court-martial board of 3 enlisted men and 2 officers that the defense had taken normal GI complaints and made them into a monumental issue. The court's law officer, Colonel James Hagan, broke into the summation at one point to caution the panel against paying any attention to news stories that the Army and Army discipline are on trial in this case. But that is one of the underlying issues, whether the Army can or should change its procedures and discipline to allow dissent. That will be on the minds of the 5 men who will decide the guilt and innocence and will fix sentences. In earlier courts-martial, 8 other soldiers were found guilty of mutiny in the same incident and were sentenced to prison terms. Don Oliver, NBC News, reporting.
Been a rough week. You've been waiting all week for this weekend. But there's a fly in the oatmeal. A headache. The painful kind that makes you feel tense. But a boy deserves a full-time father. How do you shake this headache? Anacin. Anacin relaxes the tension as it relieves pain. Life's fun again.
I'm going to take this hard steel nail and deliberately scratch 2 leading floor waxes. This one, shine scratches away. Here, it doesn't scratch away, because this is new Aero Wax with 50% more plastic to give you a shine as hard as nails. Watch again. Another leading wax, shine scratches away. New Aero Wax, even the nail won't scratch the shine away. New Aero Wax, new can, same famous value. You save 20 cents on this can. New Aero Wax for a shine as hard as nails.
The Soviet Union today convened an international communist conference, which was 5 years in the making. Differences within the structure of international communism, primarily the struggle between the Soviet Union and China, caused the lengthy delay. And although Russian Party leader Leonid Brezhnev stressed unity at the opening session, the absence of China and several other communist countries emphasized the lack of total unity. Here is a report from NBC News correspondent Kenneth Bernstein on the opening day of the conference.
Delegates from 75 communist parties, the big, the small, and the splintered, assembled in the most elegant hall of the Kremlin for the first meeting of its kind in 9 years. The absentees included China, Albania, North Vietnam, North Korea, and Yugoslavia. The agenda mostly covers unity, a controversial subject for some. In his welcoming speech, the Kremlin host, Leonid Brezhnev, said the whole world is watching. He warned that what he called the imperialists and their henchmen will try to belittle the importance of the conference. He said solidarity here would strike a blow at these schemes. He did not mention the Chinese. The oratory in closed session may go on for 10 days. Kenneth Bernstein, NBC News, Moscow.
Communist China not only is not represented at the international meeting in Moscow, but the closest it intends to get to the Soviet Union is on a fighting issue. Officials of the 2 countries will meet this summer to talk about the border fighting between the 2. Otherwise, the Communist Chinese keep to themselves against most of the rest of the world, reading the thoughts of Chairman Mao, building up their industries, and broadcasting some of the results on television for the people to see. A report from NBC News correspondent Wells Hangen.
China says it's preparing for a possible war with a series of new leaps forward in industry. Reliable figures are scarce, but my own reading of the clues available is that Chinese industrial output is running from 10 to 20% below the best previous year, which was 1966. In the meantime, China's added about 50 million people to its population, now estimated around 750 million. So if a new Great Leap Forward is launched this year, it's likely to fall as flat as the first one a decade ago. This Chinese Communist television film, recorded in Hong Kong by NBC News, naturally shows only the best plans. But even they carry many scars from Chairman Mao's 3-year purge, the so-called Great Cultural Revolution. Millions of man-hours are now devoted to Mao thought sessions. China's steel mills must again walk on 2 legs, as Mao puts it, trying to squeeze more than 10 million tons of output from obsolete and overworked machinery. Steel workers are being exhorted to produce more since Chinese and Russian troops clashed on the Manchurian border in March. Japanese sources say China is now suffering from a shortage of 400,000 technicians. No new ones have been trained since the Cultural Revolution, and many old technicians have been demoted to the ranks of laborers or peasants. Expert is a dirty word in China today. The Maoist slogan is, "Workers lead everything." China's expected growth rate this year is a measly 4%, which doesn't stop Mao from manufacturing H-bombs or even guided missiles. But the day when China can satisfy even the minimum requirements of its people in food and clothing is still far off, perhaps unfortunately for the rest of us. This is Wells Hang in NBC News, Hong Kong.
If you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on the end of your cigarette, if you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on your cigarette, well, anyway, if you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on your cigarette, you'd have a better tasting cigarette. Of course, we can't guarantee it'd smoke as smooth as a Tareyton. If you want your cigarette to smoke as smooth as a Tareyton, better face it, it'll just have to be a Tareyton. To begin with, no other cigarette has Tareyton tobacco. And when that tobacco is smoothed by Tareyton's activated charcoal filter, it tastes even milder.
That's why us Tareyton smokers would rather fight than switch.
Tareyton, with the activated charcoal filter.
The Huntley-Brinkley Report continues, brought to you by Digel, the extra-action antacid for more complete indigestion relief. Pleasant-tasting tablets or liquid.
You get many different descriptions of a common complaint.
It's a stuffy, uncomfortable feeling for me.
It's a tense, burning sensation. Rotten, miserable. Whatever you call heartburn and acid indigestion, Digel relieves the symptoms. Digel, the extra action antacid, neutralizes excess acid and has the extra action of simethicone to break up bubbles of gas, to help relax your tense, tight stomach. Digel, the extra action antacid.
Edward Murphy, the former executive officer of the Pueblo, said today that a more experienced captain and crew could have avoided capture. Murphy, who left the Navy, said the ship should have resisted, that passive surrender was against all Navy tradition. Murphy's comments appeared in the Christian Science Monitor. He is now on a lecture tour. Another Pueblo crewman, Marine Sergeant Robert Chica, also is lecturing. So far, Chica has spoken mainly before small groups in the Washington area, talking about his experiences in captivity.
I was wounded in the right thigh at capture with a large piece of shrapnel about the size of a box of matches, and this remained in my leg for almost a month before they removed it. Later on, as an individual in the crew would get sick, there was some medical attention available, depending on exactly what it was that was wrong with you. They had their own system of what they term acupuncture, which was a real ordeal. This is treatment by puncture with a needle. They firmly believe in this system. For instance, if you have an upset stomach, they stick needles in your feet, and this is supposed to cure your upset stomach. And if you have a nervous condition, they stick needles under your nose, and this is supposed to cure that. And they have this whole series of acupuncture locations on the body where they poke needles. And naturally, it wasn't a very popular cure. It is really hard to describe any particular torture scene. To an American mind, it's hard to comprehend. Now, I've been hit with rifle butts, poked with bayonets, kicked with boots, hit with hands, boards. Well, that's enough, really.
Sergeant, now that this ordeal is behind you, what is your future plans?
Well, as was stated earlier, I'm a junior in college. I want to finish college. I get out of the Marine Corps in August, hopefully, and we'll catch the spring or the fall semester. As well, I hope to use speaking engagements like this to support me through college.
Thank you, Sergeant, for a very wonderful talk.
Sergeant Chica was paid $25 for his appearance. A joint American-Australian investigation into the sinking of the destroyer Evans by the carrier Melbourne will be held at Subic Bay in the Philippines. The carrier Kearsarge is on its way there with most of the survivors. 74 men went down with the forward half of the Evans. One of them was Lawrence Riley, Jr., a boiler tender of Costa Mesa, California. Today, his father, who also served on the Evans as a chief gunner's mate and who survived, was flown to Travis Air Force Base, and there he talked to newsmen.
It's good to get back here. It was a terrifying experience out there, and we lost a lot of good people.
I just don't know what else to say.
It was just a bad news situation. It happened so fast. Before we knew it, it was over and done with.
Can you describe for us how it happened?
I was sleeping, and they hit us, and the bulkhead I was alongside my bunk collapsed. I was thrown out of the bunk. The ship turned over on its side. We somehow managed to climb through the ship and get out, and as soon as we got out, it sunk, and that was it.
What did it sound like, Chief?
Just tearing metal, like a big can opener coming through the thing.
How were you rescued?
I was in the water for about 35 minutes, and the boat from the Melbourne picked us up, picked 4 of us up, and then we stayed out there about 15 minutes more and picked up 2 more.
Did you try to get toward where your son was?
I didn't have any idea where he was. He was in the forward part of the ship, as it turned out, or right where the ship hit us. For some reason, I thought he was in his bunk. I didn't know he was on watch, actually, when it happened.
A lot of things go into your family's mouth, including a toothbrush. You probably think all toothbrushes are the same. Most dentists don't. Pico-Pay anti-cavity toothbrushes were designed by dentists and are recommended by them more than any other toothbrush. So no matter what goes into your family's mouth first, shouldn't it be a Pico-Pay anti-cavity toothbrush that goes in last?
Do you soak your dentures clean? You can brush them cleaner with Denture Cream. Look, we soaked that heavy lipstick stain, soaked it all night in the leading tablet cleanser. Even with soaking and vigorous brushing, that denture material is still stained. Now try Denture Cream, the powerful denture toothpaste. In no time, Denture Cream scrubs, brushes, polishes dentures clean, leaves your mouth toothpaste fresh. See the difference? Denture Cream outcleans your soak.
Mrs. Rose Kennedy attended Mass alone in Hyannis, Massachusetts today, the first anniversary of the assassination of her son, Robert Kennedy. Freedom House, a national educational organization based in New York, announced it will present its annual Freedom Award to retiring Chief Justice Earl Warren. President Nixon said he will nominate Donald Johnson, former national commander of the American Legion, to head the Veterans Administration. A task force of the National Commission on Violence said there is less civil strife in the United States now than there was in the latter part of the 19th century. Arab guerrillas set off explosions in Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip today, marking the second anniversary of the six-day Middle East war. A Senate committee gave unanimous approval to a bill already passed by the House, to raise the salaries of the Vice President and the Speaker of the House from $43,000 to $62,500 per year. Prices rose today on the New York Stock Exchange. The Dow Jones Industrials gained almost 2 points, and the value of an average share of common stock went up 5 cents. One of the fanciest cattle drives in the history of the West is going on in New Mexico. These days, beef cattle ordinarily go by truck or train. But the Great Western Cattle and Land Company decided it would make good economic sense to drive 600 Charolais yearlings, that's a French cow yearling, partner, to summer grazing grounds in southern Colorado. NBC News correspondent Douglas Kiker went along for the ride.
Is still as romantic as ever. Of course, this is 1969, and a few things have changed. And there's no longer any danger of a thirst-crazed herd stampeding at the smell of faraway water. They used to drive the cattle to the water, now they drive the water to the cattle. Night herding either, because modern cowboys take along their own potable corrals. Also, it used to be said that a cattle drive was no place for women and children. Well, that's changed too. Truck and the deep freeze in the chuck wagon and the mobile phone in the station wagon and the aluminum corrals and the women and the children, except for that, things haven't changed much on a cattle drive. And it's just as romantic as ever, especially to a city slicker just tagging along.
They even had a little Indian trouble on this cattle drive. Back down the trail a ways, 3 Indian kids came out to watch the herd go by. Their dogs started barking, and it caused a stampede. Douglas Kiker, NBC News, Pueblo, Pintada, New Mexico.
Good night for NBC News.